The gunshot echoed through the dusty streets of Silver Peak, Colorado, sending Kathleen Bowman sprinting toward the only sanctuary she could think of, the weathered church on the edge of town. 6 months pregnant, her heart pounded painfully against her ribs as she clutched her swollen belly with one hand and lifted her skirts with the other. Behind her, angry shouts pierced the evening air, growing more distant with each desperate step she took. The year was 1875, and Silver Peak had transformed from a peaceful mining settlement into a lawless frontier town, seemingly overnight. The silver boom had brought prosperity, but also greed, violence, and men like Victor Hanson, the man who'd promised Kathleen security when she arrived as a young widow, only to reveal his true nature after she became pregnant with his child. She reached the church door just as the sun began to set, painting the Rocky Mountains in brilliant hues of orange and purple. The heavy wooden door creaked as she pushed it open and slipped inside, her breathing ragged and painful. "Hello," she called softly, her voice trembling. The church was empty, lit only by a few candles near the altar. Kathleen moved quietly down the center aisle, collapsing into a pew near the back. Her fingers trembled as she pushed a strand of auburn hair from her face, tucked it beneath her bonnet, and tried to calm her racing pulse. "I didn't expect company this evening." The deep voice startled her, and Kathleen nearly screamed before a large hand gently covered her mouth. "Forgive me, madam. I didn't mean to frighten you." The man removed his hand and stepped into her line of sight. He was taller than most men in Silver Peak, with broad shoulders and a face weathered by sun and wind. He wore a dark Stetson hat that shadowed his features, but she could see kind eyes studying her with concern. "You're bleeding," he said, gesturing to her arm where her sleeve had torn, revealing a nasty scrape. Kathleen hadn't even noticed the injury. "I fell while running," she explained, suddenly self-conscious about her disheveled appearance and the obvious swell of her stomach. "Running from what, if you don't mind me asking?" The stranger removed his hat, revealing thick dark hair with a touch of premature silver at the temples despite his relatively young age, perhaps 30. She guessed. Before she could answer, shouts from outside the church made her blood run cold. She went this way. "Check the church." Kathleen's eyes widened with fear as she clutched the stranger's arm. "Please," she whispered. "They cannot find me here." Without hesitation, the man nodded. "Behind the altar. There's a small room where Father Thomas keeps his vestments. Go now." Kathleen didn't need to be told twice. She hurried as fast as her condition would allow, disappearing behind the altar just as the church door burst open. "Evening, gentlemen," she heard the stranger say, his voice suddenly harder, more commanding than it had been moments before. "Orion Elliott," one of the men growled. "Didn't expect to find you in church on a Tuesday evening." "A man needs quiet reflection sometimes, Jenkins," Orion replied evenly. "What brings you and Hanson's other dogs to God's house, looking for salvation?" From her hiding place, Kathleen held her breath. Orion Elliott. She'd heard the name, a former Texas Ranger turned bounty hunter who'd arrived in Silver Peak a month ago on some business no one quite understood. "We're looking for a woman. Redhead, pretty with child. Hanson's woman. She stole from him and ran. The only thing I've seen in here tonight is dust and silence, though I wonder what kind of man sends a search party after a pregnant woman instead of looking himself." There was a tense silence before Jenkins spoke again. "You do well to remember who runs this town, Elliott. And you do well to remember that even in Silver Peak, there are still some laws that matter. Now, unless you plan on joining me in prayer, I suggest you continue your search elsewhere." The heavy footsteps retreated and the church door slammed shut. Kathleen remained frozen in the small vestment room until she heard Orion's quiet voice. "They're gone, Mrs. Bowman," she said, emerging cautiously. "Kathleen Bowman. And I didn't steal anything from Victor Hanson except myself and my unborn child." Orion's expression softened as he helped her back to the pew. "I believe you. Hanson isn't known for his honesty or kindness." "He will never stop looking for me," Kathleen said, her voice breaking. "He believes the child is his legacy, his property. He doesn't care about either of us beyond that." Orion was quiet for a long moment, his eyes thoughtful as he studied her face. "There's a way to stop him, but you may not like it. At this point, Mr. Elliott, I would consider almost anything." "Become my wife." Kathleen blinked, certain she'd misheard him. "I beg your pardon, not truly," he clarified quickly. "But in name. If you were a married woman with a husband willing to claim your child as his own, Hanson would have no legal claim to either of you. You would do that." "For a stranger?" Orion's expression darkened. "Let's just say I have my reasons for wanting to see Victor Hanson denied something he wants." Kathleen studied his face, searching for deceit or ulterior motives, but found only determination and something that looked remarkably like compassion. "Where would we go? Hanson practically owns Silver Peak. I have a small ranch about 15 miles north of here. It's not much, but it's far enough from town to give you peace, at least until your child is born and you decide what you want to do next." It was madness, Kathleen thought. To trust this stranger, to accept such an extraordinary offer. And yet, what choice did she have? "If I accept your offer, Mr. Elliott, I want to be clear that this would be an arrangement of convenience only." The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "Of course, Mrs. Bowman. I'm offering my name and protection, nothing more." "Then I accept," she said, making the decision that would change the course of her life forever. "When would this arrangement begin?" Orion glanced toward the church door. "Now would be best. Father Thomas should return within the hour. We can be married tonight and leave for the ranch before dawn." The reality of what she was agreeing to hit Kathleen suddenly. "But I have nothing, no clothes, no personal belongings. Everything I own is at Hanson's house." "We'll manage," Orion assured her. "My sister left some things behind when she married and moved to Denver last year. They might be a bit large for you now, but they'll serve until we can get you proper things." As they waited for the priest to return, Kathleen found herself studying her soon-to-be husband. There was a quiet strength about him, and a sadness in his eyes that made her wonder what ghosts haunted him. But there was kindness, too. She'd seen it in the way he'd protected her without question, in the gentle way he'd tended to her injured arm with a clean handkerchief. "Why are you really doing this, Mr. Elliott?" she finally asked. Orion's gaze met hers steadily. "Because some men take what doesn't belong to them, and sometimes they need to be reminded that they don't own everything or everyone they desire." There was history there, Kathleen sensed, but before she could inquire further, the church door opened and Father Thomas entered, looking surprised to find them there. "Orion Elliott," the priest said warmly. "And who might this be, Father?" "This is Kathleen Bowman. We've come to ask for your blessing and your services. We wish to be married tonight." Father Thomas's eyebrows rose nearly to his hairline. "Tonight? That's highly unusual, my son." Orion moved closer to the priest, speaking in low tones that Kathleen couldn't quite hear. Whatever he said made the older man's expression change from surprise to grave understanding. "I see," Father Thomas said finally. "In that case, let us proceed. The Lord works in mysterious ways, and who am I to question his timing?" The ceremony was brief and solemn, nothing like the wedding Kathleen had once dreamed of as a young girl. There were no flowers, no music, no friends or family to witness their vows. Just three people in a dimly lit church, and promises made that neither bride nor groom fully understood. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Father Thomas said, closing his Bible. "May God bless this union and the child that will be born into it." Orion thanked the priest and pressed several coins into his hand. "We'd appreciate your discretion, Father. Of course. Go with God, both of you." Outside, the night had fully descended on Silver Peak. Orion led Kathleen through back alleys and shadows until they reached a small stable where his horse waited. "We'll need to ride double," he explained, helping her onto the sturdy black gelding before mounting behind her. "It's not ideal in your condition, but I'll go slowly, and we'll rest if you need to." As they rode out of Silver Peak, Kathleen leaned back slightly against the solid warmth of her new husband's chest, exhaustion finally catching up to her. She had just married a man she'd known for less than 2 hours, was fleeing the only town she'd known since her first husband's death, and was carrying a child that would be born into this strange new life she'd chosen. Yet somehow, as the gentle rhythm of the horse's gait lulled her into a half-sleep state, Kathleen felt safer than she had in months. "Rest," Orion's deep voice rumbled near her ear. "I've got you, Mrs. Elliott." The name sounded foreign to her ears, but not unwelcome. Mrs. Elliott. It offered protection, a shield against the man who had made her life a living nightmare. For that alone, she would be grateful. What Kathleen couldn't have known as they rode through the Colorado night was that this marriage of convenience would test them both in ways neither could imagine, forcing them to confront painful pasts, dangerous enemies, and feelings they'd sworn to avoid. The journey to Orion's ranch took nearly 3 hours at their careful pace. By the time the small homestead came into view, the first light of dawn was breaking over the eastern horizon. Kathleen, who had dozed fitfully against Orion's chest, stirred as the horse slowed. "We're here," Orion said quietly, dismounting before helping her down with strong, steady hands. Kathleen looked around, taking in her new home. The main house was modest but well-built, a 2-story structure of weathered pine with a wide front porch. A barn stood nearby, along with a corral holding several horses. Beyond that, open pastureland stretched toward distant mountains. "It's not much," Orion said, misinterpreting her silence for disappointment. "It's lovely," Kathleen assured him, and meant it. After months in Hanson's opulent but suffocating mansion in town, the honest simplicity of Orion's ranch felt like freedom. He led her inside, lighting a lamp that revealed a tidy, if Spartan, living area. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, flanked by bookshelves filled with more volumes than she'd expected to find in a cowboy's home. The furniture was sturdy and functional, a table with 4 chairs, a worn leather armchair, and simple cabinets. "The bedroom's upstairs," Orion said, suddenly looking uncomfortable. "You'll take it, I'll sleep down here." "I can't take your bed, you can and will," he said firmly. "You're carrying a child, you need proper rest." Too exhausted to argue, Kathleen followed him upstairs to a clean, sparse bedroom. A large bed with a patchwork quilt occupied most of the space, along with a chest of drawers and a small table holding a basin and pitcher. "My sister's clothes are in the chest," Orion explained. "Like I said, they might be big, but they're clean. There's a washroom at the end of the hall. I'll bring up some hot water for you." Kathleen wanted to thank him properly, to express the depth of her gratitude for his extraordinary kindness, but exhaustion was making her thoughts fuzzy. "Mr. Elliott, Orion, I don't know how I'll ever repay you for this." Something flickered in his eyes, an emotion she couldn't name. "Get some rest, Kathleen. We'll talk more when you've slept." After he left, Kathleen found a simple cotton nightgown in the chest and changed gratefully out of her dirty dress. She washed her face and hands with the water Orion brought up, then slipped beneath the quilt. The bed smelled of soap and fresh air, and as she closed her eyes, her hand rested protectively over her swollen belly. "We're safe now, little one," she whispered. "At least for a while." She fell asleep instantly and didn't wake until well past noon. The sunlight streaming through the window momentarily disoriented her, until the events of the previous day came flooding back. She was in Orion Elliott's home, bearing his name, though she barely knew him. Kathleen dressed in one of his sister's dresses, a simple blue calico that hung loose everywhere except her middle, and made her way downstairs. The house was quiet, but a covered plate sat on the table with a note beside it. "Gone to check the north pasture. Food should still be warm. Rest. OE." The gesture touched her, and she realized she was ravenous. The plate held scrambled eggs, bacon, and biscuits, simple fare, but delicious. She ate every bite, then set about exploring the house more thoroughly. In daylight, she could see that while the furnishings were minimal, everything was meticulously clean and well maintained. The bookshelves revealed an eclectic collection: history, law books, some poetry, and surprisingly, several novels. This was not the home of a typical ranch hand or cowboy. Curious about her mysterious benefactor, Kathleen continued her exploration. A small desk in the corner of the room held papers neatly stacked and secured. She knew she shouldn't pry, but her eye caught the letterhead on one document: Texas Rangers, Division B. So he really had been a ranger, as Jenkins had indicated in the church. She moved away from the desk, not wanting to invade Orion's privacy further, and instead turned her attention to making herself useful. The kitchen was well organized, with a cast iron stove, a pump for water, and basic provisions stored in a pantry. By the time she heard the sound of hoofbeats outside, she had prepared a simple stew from the ingredients she found and was just setting it to simmer. Orion entered, removing his hat and hanging it on a peg by the door. He paused when he saw her at the stove. "You shouldn't be on your feet," he said by way of greeting. "I've been resting all day," Kathleen replied. "And I'm pregnant, not invalid. Besides, if I'm to live here, I should contribute." He seemed about to argue, then thought better of it. "The stew smells good, thank you. It's the least I could do." Kathleen wiped her hands on a kitchen cloth, suddenly feeling awkward. In the light of day, the reality of their situation seemed even more extraordinary. "Mr. Elliott, Orion," he corrected. "If we're to convince anyone that this is a real marriage, you should use my given name." "Orion," she amended. "I think we should discuss expectations for this arrangement." He nodded, gesturing to the table. They sat across from each other, and Kathleen noticed that his eyes were a deep blue like the sky just before dusk. "As I said last night, I'm offering you my name and protection," Orion began. "In return, I ask only for your discretion. The people in these parts know me as a solitary man. They'll be curious about a sudden wife. What should I tell them? The truth, more or less. That we met some months ago, corresponded, and married quickly when we discovered your condition." He paused. "It's not uncommon out here for marriages to happen with haste when a child is involved." Kathleen nodded. "And after the baby is born," something crossed Orion's face, a shadow of an emotion she couldn't identify. "That will be your decision. If you wish to move on, then I won't stop you. But you'll have my name to protect you and the child, regardless." "Why are you doing this?" she asked again, needing to understand. "And please don't give me the same vague answer as before. If we're to live together, even temporarily, I deserve to know what motivates you." Orion was quiet for so long that Kathleen thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and controlled, but she could hear the undertone of long-held anger. "5 years ago, my sister, the one whose clothes you're wearing, was married to a man named James Wright. He was charming, wealthy, and utterly heartless. He treated her as property, much the way Hanson treated you. When she finally gathered the courage to leave him, taking their infant son, Wright used his connections to have her declared unfit. He took my nephew and made sure my sister never saw her child again. Kathleen's hand flew to her mouth. That's horrible. What happened to your sister? She eventually remarried a good man in Denver, but she's never recovered from losing her son. Wright died in a hunting accident 2 years ago, and my nephew is being raised by Wright's brother back east. Orion's jaw tightened. I couldn't help my sister then, but I can help you now. And Victor Hanson, you mentioned having reasons to want to see him denied something. Orion's eyes hardened. Hanson and Wright were business partners in Texas before Wright died. They're cut from the same cloth, men who believe their money gives them the right to take whatever they want. Understanding dawned on Kathleen. So this is personal for you. Does that change your mind about our arrangement? She considered the question seriously. No, she decided. Your reasons may be partially motivated by settling an old score, but that doesn't negate the kindness you've shown me. Relief flickered across Orion's features. Good. Because despite what you may think, I don't make a habit of marrying strangers in the middle of the night. The unexpected touch of humor made Kathleen smile, easing some of the tension between them. Nor do I typically accept proposals from men I've just met. Then I suppose we're both venturing into unfamiliar territory. Orion rose from the table. I need to finish some chores before dark. Will you be all right here alone? I'll be fine. The stew needs to simmer anyway. After he left, Kathleen returned to the stove, stirring the pot thoughtfully. She was under no illusions about their arrangement. It was born of necessity and mutual benefit, not affection. Yet there was something about Orion Elliott that intrigued her. Beneath his reserved exterior, she sensed a deep well of principle and perhaps even kindness. Whether those qualities could evolve into something more remained to be seen. For now, though, she had sanctuary, and that was enough. The days that followed established a tentative routine. Orion rose before dawn to tend to the ranch work, while Kathleen took charge of the household. They shared meals and occasional conversation, but maintained a careful distance otherwise. True to his word, Orion slept downstairs in the armchair or sometimes on a bedroll near the fire, never so much as suggesting they share the bedroom. A week after her arrival, Orion brought home supplies from Town Fabric for new clothes that would accommodate her growing belly, some books and personal items he thought she might need. He also brought news. Hanson's offering a reward for information about you, he said as they ate dinner. Not openly, but word gets around. Kathleen's fork clattered against her plate. How much? Enough to tempt some folks, but I also let it be known around town that I'd returned from Denver with my new wife. He gave her a reassuring look. Most people accepted the story without question. Silver Peak sees enough comings and goings that one more new face doesn't raise too many eyebrows. Did you see him? Hanson. Orion nodded. From a distance. He was watching everyone, studying faces. He's not a man accustomed to losing what he considers his. I was never his, Kathleen said quietly, her hand moving protectively to her belly. Neither of us were, I know that, and soon enough he'll have to accept it too. Orion hesitated. There's something else. The general store had a letter for you, forwarded from somewhere back east. Kathleen looked up in surprise as he handed her an envelope. It's from my cousin in Boston, she said, recognizing the handwriting. She's the only family I have left. Do you want privacy to read it? No, it's all right. Kathleen opened the letter and scanned its contents, her expression growing troubled. Bad news? Orion asked. My cousin Mary is ill. Nothing life-threatening, but she's asking if I might come to Boston to help her through the winter. Kathleen folded the letter carefully. She doesn't know about the baby or my situation with Hanson. We haven't corresponded in months. You want to go? The question was asked simply, without judgment, and Kathleen appreciated that. I don't know, she admitted. Mary is dear to me, but Boston is so far and in my condition. She shook her head. Besides, I wouldn't want to impose further on your generosity. It wouldn't be an imposition, Orion said. If you want to go to your cousin, I could arrange safe passage. And our arrangement, our marriage, something flickered in his eyes. It would stand. On paper, at least. You'd still have my name to protect you and the child. Kathleen considered this, but found herself surprisingly reluctant to leave Colorado, to leave this quiet ranch and the man who'd risked so much to help her. I think I'll write to Mary and explain some of my situation. Perhaps in the spring, after the baby comes, we could reconsider a visit. Orion nodded, and she thought she saw relief in his expression, though it was gone so quickly she might have imagined it. Whatever you decide, he said, rising to clear the table. You have choices now, that's what matters. Choices. Such a simple word for such a profound concept. For months under Hanson's control, Kathleen had felt her choices diminishing day by day until running seemed the only option left. Now, barely a week into this unusual arrangement with Orion, she found herself with possibilities again. That night, as a storm rolled in from the mountains, Kathleen lay awake listening to the rain pounding on the roof. A particularly loud clap of thunder startled her, and she gasped as the baby gave a strong kick in response. Without thinking, she called out, "Orion!" His footsteps thundered up the stairs, and he appeared in the doorway seconds later, concern etched on his face. "What is it? Are you all right?" "Yes, I'm sorry to alarm you. It's just—" Another kick made her smile. "The baby, I think the thunder woke him. He's kicking rather enthusiastically." Relief replaced worry on Orion's face. "That's good, isn't it? Means he's strong. Would you like to feel?" The invitation surprised them both. It was an intimate thing to offer, crossing the careful boundaries they'd established. Ryan hesitated, then stepped into the room. "If you're sure you don't mind." "I don't mind," Kathleen said softly. He approached the bed slowly and sat on its edge. Kathleen took his hand, calloused from ranch work, but gentle, and placed it on the side of her belly where the baby was most active. For several seconds, nothing happened, and Kathleen was about to apologize for the false alarm when the baby delivered a solid kick right against Orion's palm. His eyes widened in wonder, and a smile, the first full, genuine smile she'd seen from him, transformed his face. "That's remarkable," he murmured. "It is, isn't it?" Kathleen agreed, watching his expression. In that moment, with his defenses lowered by simple awe, he looked younger, almost boyish. The baby kicked again, and Orion laughed softly. "He's going to be a fighter, this one." "Or she," Kathleen corrected. "Though I have a feeling you're right about it being a boy." Another rumble of thunder shook the house, and Orion's hand remained on her belly, warm and reassuring. Something shifted between them in that quiet moment, some small but significant lessening of the careful distance they'd maintained. "Thank you," Orion said finally, removing his hand reluctantly, "for sharing that with me." "Thank you for caring," Kathleen replied simply. He stood, suddenly awkward again. "You should try to get some rest. Call if you need anything. I'm a light sleeper." After he left, Kathleen lay awake for a long time, her hand resting where his had been, thinking about connections formed in unlikely places, and how the simple act of sharing wonder could bridge even the most careful of boundaries. October gave way to November, bringing colder weather and the first dusting of snow to the mountains around Silver Peak. Kathleen's pregnancy advanced, her belly growing more pronounced as the baby became increasingly active. Dr. Miller, The town physician whom Orion had brought to the ranch to check on her estimated she would deliver sometime in late December or early January. "Everything looks healthy," the doctor had assured them both. "Just make sure she rests plenty and eats well." Orion had taken those instructions seriously, increasing his efforts to ensure Kathleen's comfort. He built a cradle from pine wood, working on it in the evenings by the fire. He brought home a rocking chair that he'd purchased from a family heading east, setting it in the warmest corner of the living area. And most surprisingly, he began to talk more, sharing stories of his time as a ranger, his childhood in Texas, and his dreams for the ranch. As her due date approached, Kathleen found herself feeling increasingly at home. She'd sewn curtains for the windows from some of the fabric Orion had brought, had reorganized the kitchen to her liking, and had even started a small indoor herb garden on the windowsill. The house was becoming their home in ways neither had anticipated. They still maintained separate sleeping arrangements, but the careful distance between them had diminished considerably. Sometimes their hands would brush as they worked together in the kitchen. Occasionally, Orion would rest his palm on her belly to feel the baby move, his expression one of quiet wonder. And more than once, Kathleen had caught him watching her with a look that made her heart beat faster. She told herself it was gratitude she felt for him, nothing more. After all, theirs was a marriage of convenience, a temporary solution to a desperate situation. Yet there were moments like when he read aloud from one of his books in the evening, his deep voice painting pictures with words, or when he returned from working outside with snowflakes melting in his dark hair, when Kathleen felt something stirring that went beyond simple appreciation. It was during the first major snowfall of the season that everything changed. Orion had ridden out early to check on some cattle in the north pasture, promising to return by midday. When the snow began falling in earnest around 10 o'clock, Kathleen wasn't initially concerned. But as noon came and went with no sign of him, and the snowfall turned into a blizzard, worry gnawed at her. By 3 o'clock, with visibility reduced to mere feet beyond the windows and no sign of Orion, Kathleen was frantic. She paced the living room, one hand supporting her lower back, the other resting on her belly where the baby kicked restlessly, as if sensing her distress. "Please come home," she whispered, watching the swirling white beyond the glass. It was the first time she'd thought of the ranch as home without qualification, and the realization startled her. When she finally heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching, muffled by the snow, Kathleen threw open the door despite the blast of cold air that rushed in. Orion appeared like a ghost through the white curtain of snow, his horse moving slowly, head down against the wind. "Thank God," she breathed as he dismounted stiffly and led his horse toward the barn. Kathleen closed the door and stoked the fire, adding more wood until it blazed high. She put water on to boil and laid out dry clothes near the hearth to warm. When Orion finally entered the house 20 minutes later, she could see he was half frozen, his movements sluggish, his lips tinged blue. "You're nearly frozen," she scolded, helping him remove his snow-crusted coat. "What happened?" "Got caught. Checking the north ridge," he managed through chattering teeth. "Horse threw a shoe, had to walk him most of the way back." "You need to get warm immediately," Kathleen said, her voice firm as she steered him toward the fire. "Change into those dry clothes. I'll make you something hot to drink." For once, Orion didn't argue. By the time Kathleen returned with a steaming mug of coffee liberally laced with whiskey, he had changed into the dry clothes but was still shivering violently, his usual tan complexion alarmingly pale. "Drink this," she ordered, pressing the mug into his trembling hands. She draped a quilt around his shoulders and sat beside him on the hearth rug, rubbing his arms briskly through the blanket. "I'm sorry to worry you," he said after taking a long sip of the hot drink. "Stupid mistake. Should have checked the weather more carefully before heading out." "Yes, you should have," Kathleen agreed, but her voice was gentle. "I was terrified something had happened to you." Orion looked at her then, something vulnerable in his gaze. "You were worried about me." "Of course I was," she said softly. "I've grown. Quite fond of you, Orion." The admission hung in the air between them. Orion's shivering had subsided somewhat, but Kathleen continued to rub his arms, needing the contact as much as he needed the warmth. "Kathleen," he began, then stopped, seeming to struggle with words. "Our arrangement, this marriage, it started as a way to protect you, but I find myself—" He set the mug down carefully. "I find myself wishing it could be more," her heart thundered in her chest. "More real," he said simply. "I know it's presumptuous of me. You're still recovering from everything Hanson put you through. The last thing you need is another man making demands. Is that what you're doing, making demands?" "No," he said quickly. "Never that. I'm just telling you how I feel. That somehow, in these weeks together, I've come to care for you, deeply." Kathleen's hand stilled on his arm. "I've come to care for you too," she admitted. "More than I thought possible, given how we began." Orion's eyes, finally regaining their normal color as warmth returned to his body, searched her face. "I don't want to pressure you. After the baby comes, if you still want to go to your cousin or make your own way somewhere else, I won't stand in your way. But I wanted you to know that you have another choice too. You could stay. We could try to make this marriage real in every sense." The baby chose that moment to deliver a particularly enthusiastic kick, and Kathleen laughed softly, taking Orion's hand and placing it on her belly. "I think someone has an opinion on the matter." Orion's smile was tentative but warm as he felt the movement beneath his palm. "Is that a yes?" Instead of answering with words, Kathleen leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, then deepened as Orion's arms came around her, drawing her closer. When they finally parted, both were breathless. "That's a yes," she whispered. The blizzard raged for 2 more days, keeping them housebound but providing the perfect opportunity to explore this new dimension of their relationship. They talked for hours, sharing secrets, dreams, and fears. Orion told her more about his past, the family ranch in Texas, lost to drought, his years as a ranger, and the circumstances that led him to Colorado. Kathleen shared her own history, her brief first marriage to a kind man who died of influenza, her desperate move to Silver Peak in search of work, and the manipulations that had led her into Hanson's orbit. On the morning of the 3rd day, when the snow had stopped and sunlight sparkled on the pristine white landscape, Orion took Kathleen's hand as they stood on the porch surveying the transformed world. "I want to do this properly," he said, dropping to one knee despite the cold snow beneath him. "Kathleen Bowman Elliott, will you be my wife? Not just on paper, but in heart and soul. Will you build a life with me here, raise this child and perhaps others with me, and allow me to love you as you deserve to be loved?" Tears filled Kathleen's eyes as she looked down at this man who had begun as her protector and had become so much more. "Yes," she said simply. "With all my heart, yes." The weeks that followed were the happiest of Kathleen's life. They still slept separately, Orion insisting that her comfort during the late stages of pregnancy was paramount, but they shared everything else. Meals, conversation, work around the ranch when weather permitted, and increasingly tender moments by the fire in the evenings. As Christmas approached, Orion rode into town for supplies and returned with not only provisions, but also small gifts, a hand mirror with a silver back for Kathleen, a wooden horse for the baby, and most surprisingly, a small pine tree that he set up in the corner of the living room. "I thought we could start our own traditions," he explained as they decorated the tree with paper stars Kathleen had cut and strung on twine, and pine cones Orion had gathered and dipped in wax to make them shine. On Christmas Eve, they sat before the fire, the room illuminated only by the flames and the candles they'd carefully placed on the tree's branches. "I have something for you," Orion said, reaching into his pocket and producing a small velvet pouch. It was my mother's. "I've been saving it for the right person." Inside the pouch was a delicate gold band set with a small but perfect sapphire. "It's beautiful," Kathleen breathed as Orion slipped it onto her finger. "Not half as beautiful as you," he said, his voice husky with emotion. They kissed beneath the glow of the Christmas tree, and for the first time, Kathleen felt completely at peace. The future stretched before them, uncertain in some ways, but full of promise and the love that had grown so unexpectedly in the shelter of their pretend marriage. 2 days after Christmas, in the quiet hours before dawn, Kathleen woke to a sharp pain that radiated across her lower back and abdomen. She gasped, clutching the quilt as the contraction intensified, then gradually eased. "Orion," she called out, her voice steady despite her racing heart. He appeared in the doorway almost instantly, as if he'd been sleeping lightly, waiting for this moment. "Is it time?" Kathleen nodded, another contraction beginning to build. "I think so. The baby's coming." Orion's preparations were swift and efficient. He had already arranged for the midwife in town to attend the birth, but the snow-covered roads would slow her arrival. In the meantime, he helped Kathleen move around the room between contractions, brought her water and cool cloths for her forehead, and held her hand through the increasingly powerful waves of pain. Mrs. Thornton, the midwife, arrived mid-morning, her competent presence immediately reassuring. "You're progressing well," she told Kathleen after examining her. "This baby is eager to meet you." The labor intensified as the day wore on. Kathleen alternated between walking, kneeling, and lying on her side, finding whatever position offered the most relief from the relentless contractions. Through it all, Orion remained by her side, speaking words of encouragement, wiping her brow and supporting her weight when her legs threatened to buckle. "I can't do this," Kathleen gasped during a particularly brutal contraction that seemed to tear her in half. "You can," Orion assured her, his voice steady even as worry creased his brow. "You're the strongest person I know, Kathleen. Our baby is almost here. Our baby." The words gave her renewed strength. This child, conceived in circumstances she'd rather forget, would be born into love not just hers, but Orion's too. He had claimed this baby as his own from the beginning, offering his name and protection without hesitation. As the winter sun began to set, bathing the room in golden light, Mrs. Thornton announced that it was time to push. Kathleen bore down with all her remaining strength, Orion supporting her back and murmuring encouragement in her ear. With a final, monumental effort, Kathleen felt the baby slide from her body, and a moment later, a strong, indignant cry filled the room. "A boy," Mrs. Thornton announced, quickly cleaning and wrapping the squalling infant before placing him on Kathleen's chest. "A fine, healthy son." Kathleen looked down at the tiny, red face of her son, overcome with a love so powerful it seemed to expand her heart. "Hello, little one," she whispered, touching his cheek with a trembling finger. Orion sat on the edge of the bed, his eyes suspiciously bright as he gazed at the baby. "He's perfect," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Just like his mother." The midwife efficiently handled the afterbirth and made sure Kathleen was comfortable before discreetly withdrawing to give the new family some privacy. "I'll be downstairs if you need anything," she said. "But I think you three are doing just fine." When they were alone, Orion gently took the baby from Kathleen's arms so she could rest more comfortably. He cradled his son, for that was how he thought of the infant, his son in every way that mattered, with a mixture of awe and determination on his face. "I promise you," he said softly to the now sleeping baby, "you will always be safe, always be loved. You will never know the kind of men who think of women and children as possessions. You will be raised to be strong, but also kind and just." He looked up at Kathleen, who was watching him through tired but happy eyes. "We'll make sure of it together." "Together," she agreed, reaching out to take his hand. "What shall we name him?" Orion asked. Kathleen had been considering names for months, but had waited, somehow knowing that this moment would come, that she and Orion would choose their son's name together. "What about Thomas?" she suggested. "After Father Thomas, who brought us together." "Thomas Elliott," Orion tested the name, looking down at the sleeping infant. "It's a good, strong name." He paused, then added, "Thomas James Elliott. James was my father's name." Kathleen smiled. "It's perfect." As the first stars appeared in the winter sky outside their window, the three of them, a family formed by circumstance but bound by love, rested together in the warm, safe haven they had created. 6 weeks after Thomas's birth, on a crisp February morning, Orion announced that he needed to ride into town for supplies. "We're running low on flour and coffee," he explained, "and I thought I might pick up something special for dinner, a celebration of sorts." "What are we celebrating?" Kathleen asked, curious, as she nursed Thomas in the rocking chair by the fire. Orion smiled mysteriously. "You'll see when I return." After he left, Kathleen went about her day, bathing Thomas, doing some light housework, and preparing bread dough to bake later. The baby had settled into a somewhat predictable routine, sleeping for longer stretches at night and showing more alertness during his waking hours. Orion was besotted with his son, often carrying him around the house as he explained ranch operations or read aloud from one of his books. The domestic contentment of their life sometimes seemed miraculous to Kathleen. Less than a year ago, she had been trapped in Hanson's grand house, a prisoner in all but name. Now she was truly free, loved by a good man, mother to a healthy son, and mistress of a home that, while modest, was filled with warmth and happiness. The only shadow on their happiness was Victor Hanson. Though he had never come to the ranch, Orion occasionally brought news from town that the man was still asking questions, still watching for her. "He's a man used to getting what he wants," Orion had said grimly, "and he doesn't like being thwarted." Kathleen pushed these thoughts aside as she heard the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Expecting Orion, she was surprised to see 2 riders approaching, neither of them her husband. Alarm shot through her as she recognized one of the men as Jenkins, Hanson's right-hand man. Quickly, she placed Thomas in his cradle and moved it to the bedroom, out of sight. Her heart pounding, she considered her options. Orion kept a rifle above the door, but she wasn't confident in her ability to use it effectively. Still, she took it down, the weight of it unfamiliar but reassuring in her hands. A knock sounded on the door, forceful but not yet threatening. "Mrs. Elliott, are you home?" Jenkins called, his voice deceptively polite. Kathleen remained silent, hoping they might think the house empty and leave. "We know you're in there, Kathleen," Jenkins continued. "We saw smoke from the chimney. Mr. Hanson just wants to talk." Her blood ran cold at the mention of Hanson's name. "Was he here too?" "My husband will be back any minute," she called through the door, trying to keep her voice steady. "He won't take kindly to uninvited visitors." "Elliott's in town," the second man said, his voice unfamiliar. "We passed him on the road. He won't be back for hours." Panic fluttered in Kathleen's chest, but she forced it down. "What do you want?" "Just to talk," Jenkins repeated. "Mr. Hanson has a proposition for you, a generous one." "I have nothing to say to Victor Hanson," Kathleen replied firmly. "Please leave my property." There was a pause, then the sound of a boot kicking at the door. "Don't be difficult, Kathleen," Jenkins growled, all pretense of politeness gone. "One way or another, you're coming with us." The door shuddered under another kick, and Kathleen raised the rifle, aiming it at the entrance. She'd seen Orion clean and load the weapon enough times to know it was ready to fire. "I'm armed," she warned, her voice stronger now, "and I will defend my home and my child." The kicking stopped. "Your child," Jenkins repeated, a nasty edge to his voice. "You mean Hanson's child?" "That's what this is all about, you know. He wants his son." "This child is an Elliott," Kathleen said fiercely. "He has my husband's name and protection." "A convenient arrangement," Jenkins sneered, "but it doesn't change the truth. Hanson is willing to be generous to both you and Elliott if you'll be reasonable about this." "There's nothing to be reasonable about. Now leave, before I'm forced to protect myself." There was muttered conversation outside that Kathleen couldn't make out, then Jenkins spoke again. "Fine. We're going. But this isn't over. Hanson always gets what he wants in the end." She listened to the sound of retreating hoofbeats, not lowering the rifle until she was certain they were gone. Then her legs gave way and she sank to the floor, the weapon across her lap as reaction set in. She was still sitting there when Orion returned an hour later, bursting through the door with his gun drawn. "Jenkins was in town, boasting that he knew where to find you," he explained, kneeling beside her and taking the rifle gently from her hands. "Are you all right? Did they hurt you? The baby?" "We're fine," Kathleen assured him, though her voice shook. "They threatened, but they didn't break in. When I told them I was armed, they left." Relief flooded Orion's face, followed quickly by anger. "This has gone on long enough. Hanson needs to understand that you and Thomas are beyond his reach." "How?" "He's powerful, connected. As long as he believes Thomas is his, that's the problem," Orion interrupted, helping her to her feet and leading her to the table. "As long as he believes he has a biological claim to your son, he'll keep trying." Kathleen checked on Thomas, who was still sleeping peacefully, unaware of the danger that had come so close. When she returned to the main room, Orion had poured 2 glasses of whiskey, pushing one toward her. "For the nerves," he explained. She took a small sip, letting the liquor burn its way down her throat. "What do we do now?" Orion's expression was grim but determined. "We end this, once and for all." The next morning they rode into Silver Peak together, Thomas bundled securely against Kathleen's chest. Orion had explained his plan the night before, and while it was risky, Kathleen agreed it was time to confront Hanson directly. The town was quiet as they made their way to the Silver Star Hotel, where Hanson kept a permanent suite. People nodded respectfully to Orion, many eyeing Kathleen and the baby with unconcealed curiosity. The story of Orion Elliott's mysterious wife had spread throughout the community, growing more elaborate with each telling. At the hotel, Orion approached the desk clerk. "Please inform Mr. Hanson that Orion Elliott and his wife are here to see him. We'll wait in the parlor." The clerk looked startled but hurried to deliver the message. Kathleen and Orion sat in the small private parlor off the main lobby, Thomas sleeping peacefully in his mother's arms. "Are you sure about this?" Kathleen whispered, suddenly doubting the wisdom of confronting Hanson directly. Orion squeezed her hand reassuringly. "I'm sure. It's time he understood that his money and influence can't buy everything." The door opened, and Victor Hanson stepped into the room. He was as Kathleen remembered him, tall, expensively dressed, with the confident air of a man accustomed to deference. His cold blue eyes flickered first to her, then to the baby in her arms, before settling on Orion with naked hostility. "Elliott," he said by way of greeting, "I understand congratulations are in order on your marriage and fatherhood." "Thank you," Orion replied evenly, remaining seated beside Kathleen. "Though I suspect you didn't send your men to our home yesterday to offer congratulations." Hanson's smile didn't reach his eyes. "A misunderstanding. Jenkins can be overzealous at times." "Let's not pretend," Kathleen said, finding her voice. "You sent them to intimidate me, perhaps even to take Thomas." "Thomas," Hanson repeated, his gaze dropping to the sleeping infant. "Is that what you've named my son?" "He's not your son," Orion said firmly. "Legally and in every way that matters, Thomas is an Elliott." Hanson's expression hardened. "Legally, perhaps, for now, but blood tells, doesn't it? And that child has Hanson blood." "That's what we've come to discuss," Kathleen said, meeting his gaze steadily. "The truth about Thomas's parentage." Something like triumph flashed in Hanson's eyes. "So you admit it?" "What I admit," Kathleen continued, her voice growing stronger, "is that I let you believe you were the father because I was afraid of you. But the truth is, Victor, you weren't the only man in my life during that time." Confusion replaced triumph on Hanson's face. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that Thomas may not be your child at all, in fact, given the timing." She let the implication hang in the air. Hanson's face reddened with anger. "You're lying. You were living in my house, under duress," Orion interjected. "And even you must know that a roof over someone's head doesn't guarantee exclusivity, especially when that person is being treated as property rather than as a human being with feelings and choices." "This is absurd," Hanson sputtered. "Look at the child." "He looks like a baby," Orion finished for him. "Like most babies do. But if you insist on pursuing this, we're prepared to make the circumstances of Kathleen's time in your house public, including your threats and coercion." "I wonder how that would affect your standing in the community or your business interests." Hanson's expression turned calculating. "You have no proof of any impropriety on my part, don't I?" Orion reached into his coat and withdrew a folded document. "This affidavit, signed by 2 of your former housemaids, details your treatment of Kathleen and other women in your employ. I've taken the liberty of having copies made. One is with my lawyer in Denver, another with the territorial governor's office." Kathleen glanced at Orion in surprise. This part of the plan he hadn't shared with her. The look he gave her communicated that they would discuss it later. Hanson took the document, scanning it quickly. His face paled slightly. "This is blackmail. This is protection," Orion corrected. "For my wife and son. All we want is to be left in peace. In return, these documents remain private." A tense silence filled the room. Thomas stirred in Kathleen's arms, making a small sound that drew everyone's attention. The baby opened his eyes that were a clear, deep blue, similar to Orion's, though of course many babies were born with blue eyes that changed later. Hanson stared at the child for a long moment, then at Kathleen, his expression unreadable. Finally, he turned to Orion. "You're bluffing about the copies." "Test me and find out," Orion replied calmly. Another silence, longer this time. Then Hanson refolded the document and placed it in his own pocket. "Very well. Keep the woman and the brat. They're not worth the trouble." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "But know this, Elliott. If I discover proof that the boy is mine, this conversation will have a very different outcome." After he left, Kathleen let out a shaky breath. "Do you really have copies of that document? And is it real?" "The document is real," Orion assured her. Those women were happy to sign once I explained the situation, and yes, there are copies, though not quite where I said they were. Will this be enough to stop him? Orion took her hand. I believe so. Hanson values his reputation and business interests above all else. The risk of scandal will likely outweigh his desire for an heir, especially one he can't be certain is his. As they rode home that afternoon, Kathleen felt as though a shadow had been lifted. Hanson might never completely abandon his suspicions, but the threat he posed had been significantly diminished. And in standing together to face him, she and Orion had cemented something important in their relationship, a partnership based on trust and mutual protection. That evening, after Thomas had been fed and settled in his cradle, Orion took Kathleen's hand and led her outside onto the porch. The night was clear, stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet sky, and a nearly full moon illuminated the snow-covered landscape. I believe I mentioned a celebration this morning before everything happened, Orion said, producing a small package from his pocket. This is for you. Kathleen unwrapped the package to find a delicate gold locket. Inside was a tiny lock of Thomas's dark hair. It's beautiful, she said, tears pricking her eyes as Orion fastened it around her neck. There's something else, he continued, taking both her hands in his. When we married, it was an arrangement born of necessity. When Thomas was born, it became something more a family, but still built on unusual circumstances. He drew a deep breath. Today, watching you stand up to Hanson, seeing your strength and courage, I realized I never want to spend a day without you. Not because of circumstance or convenience or even our son, but because I love you, Kathleen, completely and without reservation. Tears spilled down Kathleen's cheeks as she looked up at this man who had become her protector, her partner, and now, truly, her love. I love you too, she whispered. More than I thought possible after everything that happened. Orion drew her close, his lips finding hers in a kiss that promised a future filled with love and security, a future they would build together. There's one more thing, he said when they finally parted. A proper wedding. Not a hasty ceremony in an empty church, but a real celebration with friends, music, and dancing, if you want it. Kathleen smiled up at him, her heart full. I do want it, very much. 3 months later, on a perfect spring day, Kathleen and Orion renewed their vows in the same church where they'd first married. This time, the pews were filled with friends and neighbors, and Thomas, now nearly 6 months old, watched from the arms of Mrs. Thornton, the midwife who had helped bring him into the world. Father Thomas, beaming with satisfaction at how his quick action had led to such a happy union, officiated the ceremony. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder, he pronounced, and this time, the words felt like a blessing rather than a desperate gamble. The celebration afterward, held at the ranch with tables set up on the greening grass, lasted well into the evening. There was music from local fiddle players, dancing, and more food than the small community had seen in one place for years. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the land that had become their home, Orion drew Kathleen aside, leading her to a quiet spot beneath a cottonwood tree that was just beginning to leaf out. Are you happy? He asked, his arm around her waist as they watched their guests enjoying the celebration. Kathleen leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder. Happier than I ever thought possible, she answered truthfully. When I ran into that church 6 months ago, I was looking for temporary safety. Instead, I found a home, a family, and a love I never expected. And Victor Hanson, do you still worry about him? Kathleen considered the question. Hanson had left Silver Peak 2 months earlier, reportedly for business opportunities in San Francisco. Whether he had truly accepted the situation or simply decided it wasn't worth the fight remained uncertain, but his shadow no longer darkened their days. "No," she said finally. "Whatever happens, we'll face it together, and that's all that matters." Orion turned her to face him, his eyes reflecting the love that had grown from the most unlikely of beginnings. "Together," he agreed, sealing the promise with a kiss as the first stars began to appear in the twilight sky. 5 years passed, bringing changes both expected and surprising. The Elliott Ranch prospered, expanding to include more cattle and horses. The original house grew too, with Orion adding a new wing to accommodate their growing family. Thomas, now a sturdy 5-year-old with his mother's auburn hair and his father's blue eyes, had been joined by a sister, Sarah, and just 6 months ago by twin brothers, James and William. Victor Hanson never returned to Silver Peak, though occasionally news of his business ventures in California reached them. Whether he still harbored suspicions about Thomas's parentage, no one knew, but he had made no further attempts to assert any claim on the boy. Kathleen, now confidently running the household and helping with ranch accounts, often reflected on the extraordinary path that had led her to this life. The desperate pregnant woman who had hidden in a church seemed like someone from another lifetime, a scared, lonely figure she could barely recognize as herself. On a warm autumn evening, as the family gathered on the porch after dinner, Orion came up behind Kathleen, wrapping his arms around her waist as they watched their children play in the yard. "You ever think about how it all began?" he asked, as if reading her thoughts. "That night in the church." Kathleen leaned back against his chest, savoring the solid strength of him. "Sometimes, it seems almost like a dream now." "Not a dream," Orion said, turning her gently to face him. "A beginning, the best kind of beginning." Thomas called out to them, eager to show off a new trick he'd taught the family dog. Sarah toddled after her big brother, her dark curls bouncing, while the twins slept peacefully in their cradle nearby. "Look what we've built," Kathleen whispered, her heart full as she gazed up at the man who had once offered his name and protection to a desperate stranger, and ended up giving so much more. Orion's answer was a kiss, tender and passionate all at once, a promise renewed each day of the life they had created together. A life born of necessity, perhaps, but sustained and nourished by a love that had grown stronger with each passing season, as enduring as the mountains that surrounded their home and as deep as the roots they had planted in this land they now shared. In the distance, the church bell in Silver Peak chimed the evening hour, its sound carrying across the valley a reminder of where their journey had begun, and a blessing on all that had followed.